Good evening from the nation's capital. I'm Kelly Wright. Thank you for joining us as we spend this next hour together. As always, I do sincerely hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. My opening observations tonight, it was here in Washington, D.C. on this date 57 years ago that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a march for jobs and freedom. Today, people are here to have a commitment march, to recommit ourselves to the legacy of Dr. King and so many other civil rights leaders, like the late John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, causing good trouble, to let people know that we must be free at last, as Dr. King talked about, that old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. He was referring to Protestants, Jews, and Catholics, and black men, and white men, and all God's children coming together to be free at last. Yet we find ourselves now still embroiled in a racial divide and a political divide, and looking to both parties, the Democrat and Republicans, to come together to bring healing and unity to our land. But as we heard today, it is really incumbent upon each and every one of us to stand up and say that we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And those are my opening observations. And here now are excerpts of today's commitment march.
Not only do I come as a protester, but I come as a victim. My daddy was killed when I was 10 years old. Gunned down, you know that, by assassin's bullet. Some of you know, but may not know. 6 years later, my daddy's mother, my grandmother, was gunned down in the church while praying the Lord's Prayer. So I understand what it means to lose a loved one. But I'm so thankful that my grandfather and my mother and my aunts and uncles taught me about love, because Granddaddy used to say, I refuse to allow any person to reduce me to hatred. The man that killed my lovely wife and the man that killed my son, I refuse to allow them even to reduce me to hatred. I love everybody. I'm every man's brother. If we're going to resolve these issues in America, we've got to come together.
How do you speak while this young man, Jacob, lies in a hospital and you won't call his name? How do you sit while Breonna Taylor's in a grave and you won't call her name? How do you sit while Eric Garner's in a grave and you won't call his name? How do you sit while George Floyd is laying in a grave and you won't call his name? Well, Mr. Trump, look right down the block from the White House. We come to Washington by the thousands. We gonna call their name. We gonna call their name. We'll never let America forget what you done. Call their names. So we didn't just come today to have a show. Demonstration without legislation will not lead to change. We didn't come out and stand in this heat because we didn't have nothing to do. We come to let you know if we will come out by these numbers in the heat and stand in the heat, that we will stand in the polls all day long.
Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. Genuine equality is why we are here today and why people are coming together all across the world, from New Zealand to New Jersey. He said that we must not forget the days of Montgomery. We must not forget the sit-ins movement. We must not forget the Freedom Rides, the Birmingham movement, and Selma. Papa King, we won't!
And we'll be back with more to focus on what President Trump had to say during the RNC right after this. Joining me now is Dr. Benjamin Chavis. He's the president and CEO of the NNPA, Black Press USA. And we want to wrap up what happened this week with the RNC. What's your perceptions, Dr. Chavis, of what unfolded from the RNC?
Thank you very much, Kelly. I believe that this week, as well as the week before, if you compare the DNC week with the RNC week, there's a contest in America. It began with the contest for the soul of America with the DNC. With the RNC, it began with the contest for law and order in America. So now, just look, if you're an avid voter, whether you're a black voter, a white voter, Latino voter, Asian voter, Native American voter, just a voter. If you're a human being living in America and having an opportunity to cast a vote, and I would say a responsibility to cast a vote for the future of the nation, what are the choices? Law and order versus repairing the soul of the nation. And I think that there is a sharp division. One thing that I can say that was accurate about President Trump's acceptance speech, he says that there was a clear division. There was a clear, that the American voters have a clear option of we go to the right or we go to the left. But here's the problem with going to the right or the left, or choosing law and order over the soul of the nation, or choosing the soul of the nation over law and order. The truth of the matter is we do need order. We do need law. We do need justice. We do need equality. We do need reparations. We need to repair the damage of systemic racism. And I think that this is the problem. You know, I think that the national polls are going to reflect that Americans are still divided. And the reason why Americans are still divided, racially, economically, socially, culturally, is because we have not done what should have been done all these years. I'm not just talking about 2020. 2020 is the culmination of centuries of racial polarization, of centuries of systemic racism. And I just thought about it this week, Kelly, that in order to solve the problem of systemic racism, you have to have a systemic solution. And I think one of the reasons why systemic racism still prevails, we haven't come up with systemic solutions. We've come up with partial solutions. We've come up with Band-Aids. When you hear the family of Jacob Blake, sounds just like the family of George Floyd, sounds just like the family of Eric Gardner, sounds just like the family of Breonna Taylor, sounds just like the family of Sandra Bland, and the list goes on and on and on. We cannot put a Band-Aid on this. I think that if people have some motivation to vote, it is that we have to solve this problem. Voting is, I'm encouraging everybody to go to the polls and vote in record numbers, but voting alone is not going to solve this problem. We need to engage every community, every police department, every Black Lives Matter activist, every civil rights leader, every economic leader, every business leader, every spiritual leader. I don't know what's happening with our spiritual leaders. There seems to be a tone deaf going on in America when it even comes to what should America be doing spiritually. So we need a comprehensive, systematic solution to the problems that America face. And then you put this in the context of the pandemic, you know, over 180,000 people have died, and we're still dying. It looks like it's going to be over 200,000 people who are going to die by the time now in November the 3rd. But there's very little concern about the death rate, the polarization, the incarceration rate. And if we don't do something about this racially motivated police violence, I think we're going to have a serious situation facing our hand. And I'm just going to say this on the Black News Channel. The worst has yet to happen. Yeah. The worst is coming. We all see it. The handwriting is on the wall. But we can't get people to not only view the handwriting on the wall, but take an action to keep us from falling further and further into the abyss of racial hatred, the abyss of racial inequality, the abyss of financial inequality. And that's what we're facing. We got to repair America. We got to deal with the vaccine, but we also have to deal with America's systemic problem, which is racism.
Dr. Ben Chavis on the Kelly Wright Show tonight, and I appreciate you, sir. Those comments so echoing so much of the same sentiments that I have. I would go one step further, that the answer to all of this, beyond the systemic institution and of racism and the systemic changes, is that it requires the heart to be made right. Getting back to the soul of America.
Absolutely.
We got to change the heart, otherwise we can't comply with anything about law and order or justice and mercy and justice and peace. We really have a heart transformation that has to go on in this country starting now.
Absolutely. There's a sense of urgency, the sense of urgency. I keep hearing Dr. King from the grave, the sense of urgency.
Appreciate you, brother. Have a great weekend.
God bless.
And we live to fight and keep the march going on. Thank you.
Luta continua. The struggle continues.
That's right. Back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. Joining me now is ERIKA Savage Wilson. She is the owner and creator of the Savage Political Podcast. Make sure you check her out. ERIKA, you know, you have watched politics for a long time. Have you ever seen anything like we saw in these past 2 weeks, the RNC and the DNC? And let's talk a moment about the RNC closing the night out with the president accepting the nomination for re-election and then having fireworks in the midst of a pandemic.
Right. You definitely delivered that so well, Kelly. And so to your first question, have not. This is why they've both been deemed unconventional conventions, because we're in an environment where being closely connected as we would prefer to be during these times is not best, because as you already shared of the continued public health crisis that we have ongoing in the United States, with over 6 million cases confirmed COVID-19. And to your second point around the closing out of the convention last night, with Donald Trump accepting the nomination again of the Republican Party and delivering his speech, what I found to be disturbing about that is that there was actually a call for him to move that acceptance speech to Monday, because, as you well know, and our viewers as well, we have just had another hurricane to land on our shores and did substantial damage to people in Louisiana, in Texas. We're talking about floodwaters, winds, and tornadoes that spawned out of that. The youngest victim that we know thus far is a 14-year-old child that died when a tree fell on her home. And amidst of that, and FEMA people being deployed and folks that had to evacuate to shelters in the midst of a pandemic, that we have a 29-year-old young man who's clinging to life, handcuffed to a bed, who's had his colon and his intestines removed, and his family is grieving the way that his life, or actually the quality of life that he'll be having for the remainder of his days, while he's still fighting for his life, and that he was shot with his children present, that we have an economic crisis, and people that are very much so in danger of being evicted from their homes, that people have already been evicted, and people facing foreclosure, that this was so centered in fealty to Donald Trump that he could not keep his audience waiting for a few more days to really take care of the business of the American people. So it's par for the course, but it is absolutely for the country, no matter what party affiliation, a real disgrace and a real showing of his, again, personal character and where his focus is.
Before I let you go, I know you've got to run. So based on what we've seen in both conventions, the Republicans and the Democrats, do you predict that it's going to be a bruising, vitriolic campaign?
Oh, absolutely, Kelly. As a matter of fact, there's a $200 million ad buy by Donald Trump's reelection campaign that will take place on Labor Day and run all the way until November. So when we think about kind of those resources, those efforts, people are imprinted by messaging. So they are definitely going to be messaging very, very hard. And I think that it's up to people who want to retain some semblance of democracy. To me, it is beyond party. It is now at a place of where do you want to be 6 months from now? Do you want to, if you have at a place where Social Security is something that one could collect or is in the near future, do you want to be able to retain those benefits for those individuals that are receiving disability payments? Do you want to still receive those payments, which, you know, we collect taxes in order to be able to provide those specific benefits? Thinking about long term, not just about the moment. This is an opportunity for people to really stand up in whatever power that they have, whatever influence that they have, talk to unregistered voters, and also really just to message the clear, I believe, goal, which is to not only retain some semblance of democracy, but ensure that our own personal freedoms and liberties, which is for us to be able to talk on a Black news channel and have a discussion of ideas, to have healthy discourse, to, you know, no matter what it is that you feel about a person's party affiliation, that everybody does have a right to freedom and the pursuit of happiness. If those are the things that we want to see and continue to have, that it would be wise to really understand what the facts are and what's at stake, and then not only vote, but make sure that we include the people around us to ensure that they're going to be voting and completing the census as well.
ERIKA, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a lot at stake here, and I think if there's one common theme coming out of both of these parties, their conventions, is that, as they both have stated, this is the most pivotal election in history. ERIKA Savage Wilson, thank you for your insights throughout the RNC and the DNC, and of course, we'll be keeping in contact with you as we get onto the campaign trail hot and heavy now. ERIKA, appreciate
Absolutely.
you. Have a great weekend.
Appreciate you as well. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, back with more after this. Joining me now, my good friends from the West Coast, attorney Mark Harris and attorney Timothy Allen Simon. Mark, of course, represents the Ben Crump Law Firm. And then we have Timothy Allen Simon, who has his own firm, TAS Strategies. I should also point out that Timothy is the chairman of the California Black Chamber of Commerce. And Mark, of course, is a partner with the Ben Crump Law Firm. And the reason why I point that out, gentlemen, is because both of you have your finger on the pulse, so to speak, and your heart for the people who you represent. But your heart is not just for Black America, it's for all America. So based on today being an historical day, the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington, and of course here in DC, the march is going on. We're hearing from the families of the Black men and women who have been unfortunately injured or killed by police officers. Let's start there. Dr. King had a dream to see all humanity come together as a beloved society. We have a lot of work to do, especially based on what Jacob Blake's father mentioned today in an exclusive interview with my former colleague, Allison Camerata, how he went on to say that his son is shackled to his hospital bed and he's paralyzed, yet young 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, a white teenager who opened fire on 3 people, his attorney claiming self-defense, is still free, sitting at home, waiting to see what kind of charges will happen in the course of due process. Mark, how does all of this strike you?
Well, it's disturbing. I think that my partner Ben Crump has been on national television talking about it. This is not new for either of us or our firm. We've been fighting this battle for a very long time, as have other lawyers throughout the country. There are two different forms of justice in this country, and I think it's becoming very transparent what those two different forms of justice are. There's a Black form of justice and a white form of justice in America. And your viewers, many of whom are African American or Latino or Indigenous, they're aware of it. This isn't news to us. What bothers me the most about a lot of this, Kelly, is that certain people in our society are behaving as though they're just waking up to this injustice. If they really have been sleepwalking for their entire lives or for the majority of their lives, that's as disappointing to me as anything else I've seen come to light in terms of these latest events.
Timothy?
Well, as Attorney Harris knows, when we study evidence or perform evidence evaluations, there's what's called pattern behavior. And what we're witnessing today, what we're witnessing in this country has been a pattern for hundreds of years. Billie Holiday recorded the famous song Strange Fruit in protest of the lynchings that were occurring throughout America, not just in the South. This notion of sanctioned terrorism against African Americans in this country, men and women, has been going on for too long. And there is a double standard in this country. It's a double standard. If we're saying equality for all, equal and just, equality and justice for all, liberty and justice for all, then that should mean what the words mean. And I applaud, I know you're going to the March on Washington today, Kelly. My father attended the original March on Washington. We had our own local one here in San Francisco that my mother took us to. Both my mother and father have gone on. And I remember the significance of that push for freedom, that push that was, initiated by Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, so many others. And here we are again. 50 years later. So the struggle continues. My deepest gratitude to the professional sports leagues and their demonstration, listening to Chris Webber and other athletic commentaries. The owners need to go to Washington, D.C. They need to meet with Congress and make it very clear that they want to see substantive material change in policing in this country. We want to see the George Floyd Act adopted by Congress. If the Senate needs to add adjustments or corrections to it, that's what the two houses do. But this notion of simply trying to wait it out in hopes that demonstrations will go down until we have the next shooting is irresponsible. And it's time for this country to wake up and finally resolve these terrorist issues.
And out of that, we will lead to the RNC when we come back with my discussion about the RNC touting itself as being the party of law and order and why they asked that question, why can't we take care of our own? Back with more after this. And welcome back. I'm talking to attorneys Mark Harris and Timothy Allen Simon. And in the previous discussion, we were talking about the fact that we have this situation that we have a mistrust of law enforcement, and then there's the situation of how we deal with our own communities. And the reason why I go there is because that is what we hear a lot from the Republican Party. Why can't we take care of the problems in our own backyard? And then we hear this message of law and order. And yet we still have to deal with the soul of America. So based on that, what did you think of the president's speech last night, his acceptance speech, and then going on to talk about stopping violence in Kenosha, in other places like Portland, but stopping short of talking the specifics about what happened to George Floyd and Jacob Blake?
There have been so many injustices in this country. I find it interesting that this president delivered a 70-minute speech last night. I watched all 70 minutes of it. I was shocked and shook my head so many times at the inaccuracies and the attempt to kind of, as they say, offer the red meat up to his supporters. But one thing I thought about, Kelly, is that 70 minutes almost represented the 70 years since the Brown versus Board of Education case. That was in 1954. Of course, we're in 2020 now. We haven't made a whole lot of progress in some of these areas. While some African Americans like Timothy, Simon, and myself are living pretty good lives, as you're living a pretty good life in Washington, D.C., the mass grouping of our people, the masses of African Americans and others are not living a substantially better life. And so what I was struck by was just the inaccuracies, the inconsistencies, kind of leaning back a little bit on the last topic we discussed. Our self-esteem has been shattered. I'm not a psychiatrist or a sociologist, but I do understand that when life has been devalued, when 3 young children witnessed their parent being shot 7 times in the back in real time, it's very difficult to have a high self-esteem. And if you don't have a high self-esteem, you can't operate the golden rule, which requires us to treat others and love others as we love ourselves. If we don't love ourselves because we've been devalued and dehumanized, it all fits together. So these problems are separate but connected. I think that to call the Republican Party and the conservatives within the Republican Party advocates of law and order, I don't know anybody who's more of an advocate for law and order than the Black folks who are most victimized by it.
So the lawlessness side of how he described Joe Biden and the Democrats, I don't think carries much weight. It was a speech to his base largely. I'm not convinced that in terms of swing voters, that it had a major impact, but there is something I should point out, that the best speech of the entire convention, since we've now completed last night, was Anne Marie Johnson. And I believe African Americans should be so proud that whether it was Michelle Obama's speech in the Democratic Convention or Anne Marie Johnson's speech last night, that we still, as a people in this country, remain the moral conscious. We remain the North Star. We remain the directive towards justice. And I think that's what young people should take away from this, that on either side of the aisle, when it comes time to talk about truth and justice, they come to us because we have the historical experience of the consequences, but also we are the unquestioned leaders when it comes to that discussion.
Obviously, we've got a lot to talk about between now and November, the election day. So I look forward to having you on weekly so we can continue to have this dialogue amongst each other. We need it.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for the great work that you and your team do.
Thank you, Timothy Allen Simon and Mark Harris, attorneys at law.
Appreciate you, Kelly. Thank you.
All right.
California connection in the house.
That's right. Much love to you. Have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're back with more after this. I'm joined now by Bob Woodson, and he's the founder and director of the Woodson Center and also the organizer of the 1776 Project. And, yesterday we were talking about politics and we were talking about what America really needs beyond the scope of politics. Based on what happened in the RNC and the DNC last week, now that it's all come to a conclusion with the president accepting his nomination for re-election from the Republican Party. And of course, it ending with fanfare, with fireworks and everything being displayed. Juxtapose that or contrast that with me in terms of what the country is really embroiled in and what's needed.
Well, I guess what I was impressed with is that the convention dealt with the entire spectrum of issues that we have. The one that is concerned most to me and a lot of Americans is the law and order. If we do not have safe streets and safe communities, if police are going to be assaulted, and as a consequence, they withdraw and they're resigning in record numbers. There's an overall 65% decline in police recruitment. In some cities, 911 calls are not being responded to because of the dearth of police, or many of the police officers are preoccupied with trying to control violence downtown. And so that worries me, because the first responsibility of the state is to protect its citizens. If the police are going to be denigrated the way they are now, you see police officers are being stoned, and public officials in some of these cities are compelling the police to restrain themselves, and as a result, citizens therefore are talking about arming themselves. This is a chaotic situation. So I was listening more for what the party was going to do to address stabilizing our community, to have law and order. Unfortunately, I didn't hear any of that in the Democratic convention. And so I really think that's one central issue that everybody needs to be transfixed on and make their decisions based upon. It's almost a vote between chaos or community.
But I want to get to something that's really, I think, instructive for everybody who's been watching the mother and father of Jacob Blake, the young 29-year-old black man shot in Kenosha 7 times in the back, and juxtapose that against a young white man, 17 years of age, opening fire on peaceful protesters, and then being able to walk away from it, and then once found, still alive, and he was armed. The point that I wanted to get to was Julia Jackson saying something that was so profound. First of all, forgiving the man who shot her son, but then going on to say, America is great when we behave greatly. That's a message to Republicans, to Democrats, to independents, to you, to myself, to all of us, to think better about what we are doing, to act greatly. And for me, looking at both parties, I don't know if I've seen any of the parties performing at their best. What hurt me with the Republicans is that they made no mention of Jacob Blake.
Right.
And that is an insensitivity that says to me, you're tone deaf. I didn't hear the church evangelicals step out to say, we can do better, we must be better. But I heard this woman, this mother's cry, saying, America is great when we behave greatly. And that's going to the core of her belief. People talked about Christianity, but that goes to the core of a woman who's going through pain. And out of that pain, she is seeking to empower all of us as American to be a better and beloved community.
I totally agree with you, because Pence in his speech never mentioned wrongdoing by police. And on the other side, Kamala Harris never mentioned wrongdoing by rioters and people like that. So you're right, you have, but let me just challenge you a little bit. I think the symbols that we choose to illustrate our point, we know who this man is. We know who Bernita Taylor is. We know who George Floyd is. But we don't know who Anessa Scott is. That's the little girl in Madison, Wisconsin, who was shot in the head. 5 years previous to that, she was taped on her knees in Chicago, praying with tears in her eyes that God would come to Chicago. Well, she is one of 20 children in Chicago under the age of 10 who were killed. But they, and this is what surprised, I got a call from one of my grassroots moms whose 8-year-old daughter was killed on the 4th of July. A member of Black Lives Matter called her and said she needs to tone it down because it distracts from their agenda. And she was outraged. All I'm saying to you is, yes, but why is it that we only know of the Blacks who were shot by white police and not the enormous numbers who are shot by one? We have an internal problem that goes unrecognized. If we didn't have a single white killing a single cop for the next 5 years, what would it mean for the 20 children are being shot in these cities if we're not addressing it? What about justice for Black children whose victimizer looks like them? Why don't we discuss that? That's the bigger problem that we're facing.
There are other organizations, good, solid organizations and individuals who are aggressively and proactively caring for their communities and doing the best that they can do. So when we get beyond law and order in the soul of America, it really boils down to, it's not going to be a president, it isn't going to be a particular party that will heal the wounds that we have inflicted upon ourselves as a community, but what we must do within our community to heal ourselves. And that's why, to the point of so many people, where is the church? Where are the people of faith? And where are the community leaders who are strong enough and bold enough to go into those communities? And they're there, Bob. You're there, others are there. And that's why on this show, I like having your voice and the voices of violence interrupters from Cure Violence, or mentors from Champs, who are saying, yeah, but there's a problem with policing in America, but there's also a problem with Black people policing themselves and making sure we take care of ourselves. And today, on this historic 57th anniversary on the March on Washington, where Dr. King talked about that dream, he was also talking about a dream where we could become that beloved community. And that starts at home in our own community.
It really does, but you're almost a lone voice. Unfortunately, there are not too many people in the media that have any interest in addressing the enemy within or focusing attention on it. Look at where all the money is being invested. It's almost like a bait and switch game. Mm-hmm. When Kamala Harris on talk, oh, it's systemic racism. So all of the corporations are putting money by the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars going to Black Lives Matters. So some middle class, angry Black folks can have seminars, equity seminars with white people, trying to get them to change their white supremacist attitudes. Tell me, and they will be enriched, but tell me what it means to de-racialize white people, if that's the goal, if that's the antidote to systemic racism. Tell me how that investment of money is going to contribute to improving conditions. What I'm trying to do with the Woodson Center in 1776 Unites is persuade those corporations to invest directly into the kinds of programs you just said, the violence interrupters. We should be pouring resources into these troubled communities so that grassroots leaders that are indigenous, who share the same zip code, the people with the answers are the people in the community with the problem. Then let's shift attention, let's shift money, and let's shift our reporting on how do we begin to heal from within. But right now, I really think that low-income Blacks in these killing fields are being exploited. Their demographics are being used to then shake down white people to get grievance money so it can be invested in teaching white people to be de-racialized. That's the scam that is going on that just really bothers me. And so I'm really pleased that you are at least bringing attention to the fact that there are resources within the community suffering the problem, and they need to be highlighted, they need to be rewarded, they need to be celebrated, and they need to be supported.
Bob Woodson, you are a man of great expertise and experience in what you've been through. I appreciate you being on this program and having this stimulating conversation that we're having. We must continue to do this, and we must continue to bring in more voices from all sides of the spectrum. But again, seeking the truth, the illuminated truth. And I know for you, it's really rests within the hands of God, but we have some responsibility in that regard too, and that is to set the captives free. And certainly a lot of people in Black America, because of the disparities and inequities and being in low income situations, they're captive. And I know you're trying to set them free. So give me a final word, if you will, in terms of this anniversary march, the 57th anniversary march on Washington. You knew Dr. King. Tell me what he would say today.
Well, I guess what I like most and admire most about Dr. King is that he really summoned our better angels. He said the best way to destroy an enemy is make them your friend. And that our goal isn't to punish white America for its sins, but is to liberate all Americans to be free. And Dr. King personally suffered two times. His home was bombed, and he was punched, assaulted, he was stabbed. He went through all of those trials and tribulations. He did so without being bitter. And I remember reading about him standing outside of his burning home with his wife and small baby, with 200 armed blacks around him, angry and ready to tear down that city. And even in the presence of this threat to his wife and his child, he counseled peace. He said, put your guns down, put your pitchforks down, that the way forward is peace. I mean, to me, Dr. King is a powerful witness, and a witness is stronger than an advocate, because advice leads you takes you to a certain place, but wisdom takes you by the hand and leads you there. So Dr. King, by his powerful moral witness, took us by the hand as a nation and led us to a better place. And I just hope that others will remember more than his I Have a Dream speech, but remember his witness and the sacrifices that he made. That should really encourage us as well. And we should emulate his openness and his willingness to sacrifice himself.
Bob, thank you. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? Let's get to that beloved community. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
God bless you and have a great weekend.
Bless you too. See you.
All right. Back with more after this. Back with the program now, and I want to thank each of my guests who appeared on tonight's program. I certainly want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out to watch. And certainly what we're learning in this day and time is that it is necessary for all of us to become united, not divided. Hopefully as we move along, we will learn to be righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading not racism, not fear, but love, freedom, and peace. Have a great weekend, everyone. God bless.
That means you, all unite, and you on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, brothers, all sisters and sisters on the love train. Get on board the love train. Everyone's invited.